Welcome back to this week's edition of Conversation from the Trenches. Today's conversation, as I've mentioned in the write-up for to this particular edition, is a conversation straight from the heart, because this is a topic that is very, very close to my heart as well as my guest's heart. And in a little bit, I have explained my reasons as to why this is so close to my heart, and a little bit we will know why adoption is so close to Gayatri's heart. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about why we are talking about adoption. So far in Conversations from the Trenches, we've talked about women, women's issues, the journeys of women, and particularly women at the intersections. Now, there is a reason I believe adoption is of relevance, particularly now. Once upon a time, women had very definite, defined, and rather narrow roles to play. And this was what was socially acceptable. Likewise, there were also very narrow, defined, understandings or formulae for the ideal family. However, over the past few decades, we have been seeing change unfolding. Women and men are stepping out of traditional molds. They are challenging stereotypes. We are seeing many different ways of people being themselves and living lives that are meaningful for them. Likewise, the concept of family is also expanding and evolving. It's no longer, a family today is no longer about a father, mother, and children. It can be couples of same sex, it can be single parents. The permutations and combinations are huge and immense. In this context, as the gender roles evolve, as people evolve from stereotypes, as the concept of family itself expands, adoption has come to play a very central role in the forging of families. And it is very important for us to look at adoption through this particular lens, through the lens of love, through the lens of connection, through the lens of completeness, through the lens of forging families and creating new interpretations to the word family. So today I am extremely happy and privileged actually to have someone who is doing some stellar work in the adoption space. I have with me Gayatri Abraham, who's a mental health professional and the founder of Padme Foundation. Now, Padme is a non-profit go-to resource site for, in the adoption space that works with parents by adoption or parents who people who wish to adopt. Welcome, Gayatri. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation.
Thank you, Rekha. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Adoption is, as you said, very close to my heart, and with a lived experience as well. And I'm happy to share my journey and the different aspects and nuances in adoption.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that we talk about this now. It's so important that adoption is given its right space under the sun in the mainstream as something that's absolutely normal. Not, there's unfortunately a lot of traditional bias against it, and we will come down to it down the line. But first of all, Gayatri, I have had the privilege of following your journey for quite a few years. In fact, as I was getting ready for this, live, I remember it was almost 7 or 8 years ago that we first met, and I think we both spoke about our journeys, and you spoke about adoption with so much passion. And I get goosebumps when I think about how far how the journey of yours has unfolded, that you actually went into the mental health space and you started Padme, right? But for the larger audience, please tell us, why are you so passionate about adoption, and tell us about your journey. I mean, I really want the listeners to hear your journey that brought you to, that led you to starting Padme, and and for the work you do today.
Yeah. Thank you, Rika. Thank you. I mean, I do remember that brainstorming session 8 years ago, 7 years ago. And I think at that point in time, I think it was just deliberating, do I work in this space at all, right? Yeah. At that point in time, I was trying to come back into get my feet back into the workspace or the corporate space, as I recall it then,
Yeah.
while there was a like quite a lot of gap in my career, there was a long gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, I you Of course, between 2002 and, like, say, 2015, I've been doing a whole lot of work, but more from a consultancy, or taking up projects, mini projects, and working on, but never really attempted to get back into the mainstream. It
Yeah.
was a choice that I made at that point in time. As a family, we made the choice
Yeah.
that I would want to be there for the
Right.
children up until a certain age. And
Yeah.
then, let's see, of course, I was very apprehensive at that point in time to just not think of coming back to work at all, and how I'm going to
Yeah.
find, what the
Yeah.
situation
Yeah.
in terms of women coming back to workplace after maternity or post-adoption process, or whatever it
Yeah.
may be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was rather nervous and apprehensive at that point in time. But I think I really, you know, I really enjoyed those years, you know, with my children, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was beautiful. It was nice. I was there. I was quite happy being that homemaker. I like,
Yeah. Yeah.
attending PTMs and, taking them for
Yeah.
birthday parties. I enjoyed
Yeah.
every bit
Yeah.
of that,
Yeah.
inviting mummies to the group and, catching up. There was absolutely no guilt, okay, at all. I just enjoyed that space.
Yeah.
Of course, while you're moving into another phase, the children are growing up, then you want to, I mean, I was looking at doing something which was meaningful, which was something that I would
Yeah.
that I can even work at my pace.
Yeah.
I realized that I was too late to get back into the corporate hold. It's going to be a struggle for me. I did try a few times
Yes.
until recently, in fact,
Yes. Yes.
and somehow it's just not worked for me, for
Yes.
perhaps the age bracket that I'm in, or whatever. So, and while deliberating this with another mentor,
Yeah.
with actually my ex leader, my boss of a public relation firm. And, while I was sharing, and she's been part of my journey in the adoption space as well. So while putting up a proposal, I said, it was in 2015, I think, when CARA, that is Central Adoption Resource Authority, went digital,
Yeah.
okay, in terms of placing adoptions. And then I thought that was probably the best time for me to enter the space,
Yeah.
providing content.
Yeah.
So I came in with just, creating a website where I could pull in all the content for stakeholders
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
let that be that go-to resource, or that one-stop
Yeah.
destination for adoption for
Yeah.
all stakeholders, whether they were pediatricians, the medical community, the parents,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
the adult children of adoption, then of course the lawyers,
Yeah.
the institutions that are working around in this space, the entire adoption ecosystem.
Yeah.
That is how the journey began.
Right.
And I had absolutely no idea that I would end up doing this. Trust
Yeah.
me, I didn't think that at that this is going to be part of my profession. This is going to be part of my journey.
Yeah.
I never ever dreamt of that at all. I mean, I wasn't even thinking on those lines.
But Gayatri, when I met you and you were deliberating, your passion to do something in the adoption space, it was just obvious. It wasn't just obvious. It was the one thing that stood out in the room. And you were talking about getting back to work. I remember we were talking about corporate and we were talking about work roles, but the way you lit up when you spoke about adoption and wanting to do meaningful work, it was so obvious to me that this was something that was so close to your heart. And deep down, I found myself saying, I really hope she does something, because it's beautiful to watch you. It was very lovely to watch you light up with that sense of
Mhm.
purpose. And
Yeah.
that was what I was curious about, saying, what is it about adoption that just has your whole heart and makes you light up like this 100-watt bulb?
Yeah, I think it just comes from the space of my own journey and
Mhm.
experiencing it.
Yeah.
22 years ago when I applied for a day for adopting my first daughter, our first daughter. I think at that point in time, it was all so new, and can you imagine 22 years ago what the
Yeah.
stigma would have been at that time,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So there was a lot of myths and biases even then, and more steeped, I would say.
Yeah.
Basically coming from a space where I think the environment of the society was not having the full
Mhm.
picture on adoption itself,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's what you hear in the media or in
Yeah.
movies, and the concept of adoption was
Yeah.
coming from there rather than anything else. So, yes, it was it was a difficult time for us, and yet something I always, I think, even I do remember sharing this with my husband when we were dating. Let's have a child through the biological route, and perhaps we'll do the adoption. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And well, the biological route never happened, and it was just the adoption for me, and
Yeah.
for medical reasons. However, I think it is, it's important to. So and so because of all that mystery that was surrounding
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
challenges that I was facing, but
Yeah.
actually experiencing the joys and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
struggles along with it,
Yeah.
and that it was doable.
Yeah.
That it's nothing
Yeah.
out of the ordinary.
Yes.
You can be a parent
Yes.
by adoption,
Yes.
and its adoption is not superior or inferior to the biological route, as
Yeah.
Dr. Aloma Lobo would always say this to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's when the journey started. And it's just, during that point, I think when I met you, just few years prior to that, our second daughter joined us, right?
Yes.
And we expanded our family once again
Yes.
through the adoption
Yes.
process. So I think at that point in time, there was a lot of churn happening for me
Yes. Yes.
in terms of the way it was received by the society, by the
Mhm.
environment, the legal
Mhm.
processes in place.
Yeah.
Even to get a birth certificate at that point in time was problematic. To
Yeah.
get, so those things started kind of irritating and annoying me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then this whole disconnect which
Yeah.
Kara brought in with the digital,
Yeah.
everything coming onto the digital platform. I
Yeah.
thought it was removing the emotional connect with the caregivers, who are primarily the childcare homes,
Right.
and the specialized adoption homes, and then you don't have a direct connect with them anymore. You got to upload all your documents, and I thought
Yeah.
that process for parents would be very hard,
Yeah.
and I was blessed to have that opportunity to have a mentor like
Yeah.
Dr. Aloma Lobo along my journey for almost
Mm.
22 years now.
Mm. Mm.
So
Mm.
I and the disconnect, I think
Yeah.
that, and a lot of parents reaching out to me for my experience,
Yeah.
and the lack of content, and the lack of language, and the lack of
Yeah.
information and resources
Yeah.
not available on the
Yeah.
online platforms, right? I think
Absolutely.
that's what
Absolutely.
kind of brought me into the adoption space, thinking, one, we will have a go-to resource where all the information is going to be there. Two, we
Right.
are going to sit there and create awareness and talk about adoption, bringing experts in the adoption space, and
Mm.
create a kind of a public space for people to tune in and
Right.
understand what adoption is.
Right. That's you hit the nail on a problem. And one of the biggest problems is even when somebody wants to adopt, you don't, it's like hitting a wall. You have to actually go and do research and, I mean, obviously when you want to adopt, there's so much of emotion involved. There's an emotion, it's an emotional decision. It's a decision of wanting, to experience parenthood. It's very deep. And then you're hitting blanks, right? So, and I know a number of people who say, I'll adopt, and then they stop short because then they don't know what next. They
Hmm.
don't know who to talk to. And there's all there's a lot of myths, all the stuff that we read in the media, which talks about long waiting periods. And, we hear a lot about the challenges, right? And I always feel when I look at the content that's in the media about adoption, I feel it's extremely narrow, it's extremely one-sided. We don't seem to get a very holistic picture. So can you give us can you help us understand the adoption landscape in India today in a very holistic sense?
Actually, there has definitely been a lot of growth in the
Mm,
system, right? From what it was 22 years ago to where we are today.
yeah,
There's been a lot of, I think, uh, in terms of information itself,
yeah,
right? In the last 6, 7 years, I
yeah.
think it's really gone up. Okay,
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
is a lot of information. However, as you mentioned, uh, it's also how one is perceived or understood adoption, and
Yeah,
then how does the media reflect the whole process, or
yeah,
anyone else, right,
yeah,
within outside of the system,
yeah,
how
yeah,
do they view adoption?
yeah,
I think there was, that the biases or the steeped biases or those unconscious biases,
yeah,
from how one was raised to what was spoken about adoption,
yeah,
the cultural nuances in each of these systems. So many
yeah,
things one needs to
yeah,
has impacted, right?
yes,
The
yeah,
has brought in those colored the adoption ecosystem, right?
yes, yes.
Um, so I think it's important, but now I see a lot of hybrid families coming into the adoption ecosystem, right? So you see parents who already have a child through the biological route actually opting for adoption, single parents,
Yeah,
coming forward to adopt. So I think it's very, very heartwarming,
yeah,
and I think we are in a good space now. I mean,
yeah,
I think we must say that we've grown as a
yes,
society in this space, right?
yeah,
From where
yeah.
it was to where we are right now.
Yeah. Can you tell us, can you just very broadly and very briefly tell us about the process of adoption? In a simple nutshell, I can already see questions coming in. So once you explain the process, I'll put up the questions for you to
Sure.
add on to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So here is what it is, right?
Mhm.
Let me just first start, which is very, very important.
Yeah.
That is that the adoptions in India, the legal adoptions in India, is through CARA, which is Central Adoption Resource Authority under the Ministry of Women and Child Development,
Yeah.
at the center.
Yeah.
So all the processes, all
Yeah.
your documents, everything has to be uploaded into
Yeah.
the CARA website,
Yeah.
okay? And
Yeah.
then, of course, then the processes begin, which,
Yeah.
so I would want to reiterate, if someone is looking out or someone is contemplating,
Mm-hmm.
in the audience,
Mm-hmm.
that is asking you these questions, that please just go through the legal route.
Right. When you say a
It's
legal
very,
route,
very
you're saying to get a lawyer and then proceed. Is that what you're
no.
talking about?
Please only go through CARA.
Ah, okay. That's all right. Okay.
Yeah, only go through CARA, not your local childcare agencies.
Yeah.
They are okay. Of course, they're allowed to do the home study report, and they need to have their licenses in place for them to
Yeah.
do so.
Yeah.
And the licenses are checked every 5 years by CARA.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something called the State Adoption Resource Authority that works along with the state government, that monitors and facilitates adoption
Yeah.
processes, as well as monitoring the childcare agencies and the
Right.
care homes and the specialized adoption homes, to see whether they have a process in place.
Right.
So
So,
going directly to a childcare home or a special adoption agency and doing the adoption process is not probably the best way to do it.
right. So go to Kara, register there. So is there a qualifier about who
In
can
fact,
adopt?
it's illegal to do that, to go directly to an agency and get the
Okay.
adoption process done. You need to go through the right channels, and because it's important. That's how we can track trafficking. That's how we track that children are in safe homes. That's how we can track that that the most important thing is a child is coming from and from an institution, from a care home, and we, as a society, as responsible citizens, we need to heed to the law, go with the law, and ensure that you provide that safe home for the child.
Yeah. So for someone who wants to adopt, what are the qualifiers that they need to meet? What, there must be, the system must have certain qualifiers in place as to who can adopt, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so there is not really anything like a qualifier in that sense, but there are certain categories of children who come into the adoption pool, and there are certain categories of people who can adopt, right? So the categories would be domestic parents, of course, and couples and single parents waiting. Then you have the NRIs, then you have the OCIs, then you have the foreign open to the adoption, open to other countries where people can actually do that, right? So someone's asking for, do you have any information about NRI
adoption process, not the US?
Well, please write into adoptpadme@gmail.com, and then we can discuss that further. We do have an OCI WhatsApp group where we share information on the process, and we would be able to help you and guide you on that, Gitanjali.
All right. So, so there is no restriction per se on people who
There is no restriction. However, there are certain guidelines, right? That the home study report gets done. So let me just set the process. Now, once you upload all your, I'll start with that, so that then there is a kind of a sequence. I mean, there is a step-by-step process on what and who and how it's done, right? So you have you upload your documents, you go to the CARA website, you upload your documents. You would have the initial documents in terms of your work certificate, your salaries, your tax, and your your health, the medical requirements that are required, all of those things. You get that uploaded, then you get a registration number. Then you can choose. Okay, the couple or the parent can choose a childcare institution or a specialized adoption agency close to the place where they live locally. For instance, if you're in Bangalore and if you live in Indranagar or Krishnarajapuram, then you choose those adoption agencies which are closer to your place for a home study report, and the social worker would then fix a call. It will take about 1 or 2 months, and with the pandemic, the process has been delayed. Okay, they're bringing everything back into a certain timeline now, but the last 2 years, everything has been delayed. So you get a home study done by a social worker who's going to look at your socio-cultural, financial frameworks, see whether you're fit enough to be a parent. Remember, this is not a direct personal attack on you when the social worker comes in to do these checks. It's about their own responsibility of placing the child in a safe home. So being transparent with them, talking about your own challenges will help you to further the process in a more what do I say, pleasant manner, right? If you're going to have a pushback and you're going to not want to give in certain information, then that's going to derail the entire process. And adoption has to be viewed from a child-centric process, or a child-centric perspective, and not really from a parent perspective. So that's very important. Okay. Once that HSR is done, then you wait. Now, here is where the waiting is, which you asked me right in the beginning. I thought I'll wait and answer that with the process. So the wait can be it was initially 2 years, and it became 2.5 years. Now with the pandemic, it's 3. Now we hear that it's 3.5 years also. Okay. So, so that is That's something that is causing a lot of anxiety for
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah.
And this is where, a few tips for parents who are watching and listening in, right? If you've decided to adopt, then please put in your papers immediately, okay? Because the wait is long, especially if you're coming in your mid 30s, late 30s. Mid 30s is still okay, late 30s, 40s, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to, you're going to be delayed, and as a couple or as an individual, you're going into a different life stage itself, and
Yeah.
now the child will be joining in, which will add certain other
Yeah.
dynamics into that family system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's important to kind of look at the process earlier on,
Hmm.
and apply um, as soon as you've made that informed decision, okay?
Right.
And then wait.
Yeah.
And you have, of course, like there are categories in terms of people who can adopt, right? I mean, so you
Yeah.
can have single parents adopting, male or female. Male will not be able to adopt a girl child.
Yeah.
Then you have couples who can adopt, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, you have the NRIs, the OCI, then the foreign adoption couples who want to look
Yeah.
at India as an option for
Yeah.
expanding their families. So
Yeah.
what happens is they would come later. The foreign adoptive parents waiting or looking at, or prospective parents looking at, would be the last on the line for
Yeah.
in the adoption process itself, because one needs to give the domestic and the NRI and the OCI,
Yeah.
parents, okay,
Right.
chance at expanding their family.
Yeah. All right. Okay, great. I have a comment here from Neelima Mehta who says, I'm happy to mentor and do some hand holding in the adoption journey if anyone needs support. And she's put her email in. Neelima, as Gayatri pointed out, I think you should reach out to Padme and, see if you can collaborate, or if your skill sets, your experience, and your support aligns and is synergistic with their work. Because I think one of the things that's coming out for in this conversation is the criticality of doing things through the right channels, through the right ways, and keeping on the right side of the law, right? So it's always good to be in that ecosystem, which is helping people in those channels. And we all do so much better when we collaborate. Gayatri, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so Nilima Mehta is a veteran in this space, Rekha, just to
Okay.
inform you.
Yeah.
She was here before I was.
Sure.
And she's, just to add that, and she's a counselor, she's in the mental health
Yeah.
space.
Sure.
She's written a book, and
Sure. Sure.
so
Yeah.
she's another source if people want to go out and,
Okay. Sure.
and connect as well. Well, of course, in Padme Foundation, what we've done is that we've also have made it into a very professional space, right?
Right.
Because we also have counselors and mental health professionals who are trained in not only in the adoption counseling parts, but also come from a background of counseling, or
Yeah.
the counseling psychology or clinical psychology.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important that we have
Yeah.
trained counselors in this
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can be detrimental,
Of course.
in what kind of advice or guidance that you may
Yeah.
offer.
Yeah.
And in fact, like Dr. Nilima, and there are few people who've been working in this space, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Few and far between for the numbers that we have right now. We have 30,000 parents. Unfortunately, the mandate in India, we are not even mandated, or parents or couples who are looking at adoption are not mandated to do a preparedness session or go for
Yeah.
counseling. It's
Yeah.
not mandated like in the West or
Yeah.
in UK and in
Yeah.
the US and in many parts of the European continent,
Yeah.
Australia, everywhere it's mandated.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
again, this is not like a personal,
Yeah.
you know,
Sure.
not to be taken very personally, because adoption has its own nuances, and one needs to understand those nuances before you embark on this journey.
Absolutely, because I think at the heart of it, we have children. We have children who are at some level being displaced, and no matter how important it is or how much they benefit from a process of adoption, the fact of it is that's not easy at a child level, and we have to keep the welfare of the children at the heart of it, right? But now it comes, I want to talk a little bit about the children, right? Because we talk about children being, adoption being a child-centered process or a child-centered activity. And we don't very often talk about adoption from the perspective of the children. And which means there's a lot, it gives, there's food for a lot of biases to also creep in over there. Tell us about the children who enter the system for adoption. What are the possible circumstances in which
Yes.
a child may need to be adopted, and how do they legally qualify?
I think it's a very, very important part of psychoeducation that I do in all my counseling sessions. Okay.
Yeah.
Because parents, or even in our workshops, okay, we bring in the aspect of who are the children coming into the adoption pool itself. It's important that couples and single parents are sensitized on this so that they know how to navigate that process. So you have three categories. You have the children who are surrendered by parents or single parents, okay, by the birth parents. You have the abandoned children. Then you have, of course, children who are orphaned, okay. Now, surrendered, and all of these three, like, okay, there could be an overlap right now. Orphaned, normally what we've seen, or what I have seen at least personally, often children, of course, you have the age category of 0 to 2 and 2 to 4 and 4 plus and 4 to 8 and 8 plus in the category of children that you can adopt. But the older children, slightly older children, may come in from that space of, there is a probability that they may come in from the space of being orphaned suddenly, either by the death of one or two of the parents, or some unusual circumstances that has left them orphaned. Okay, that's one area. Now, abandoned can also be like out of marital, relationship. Then it could be, sometimes we've even heard of rape of young girl children. Also heard of situations where some children who have disabilities, they could be abandoned. Sometimes economic situation also could be there. So again, surrendered also can overlap with the abandoned. In the abandoned, what happens most often than not, that it is sometimes birth parents don't know where to place the child. That's why it's important to have in every constituency or in every district, where can you place the child for in a safe home, right? Sometimes you do see that children with disabilities, as I said, could be a cross section in both. But these are some of the areas, and of course, I mean, there are more, but mainly I'm just highlighting the few areas that we see children coming in from these spaces. So having to first recognize that is very important by the parents by adoption. Recognizing that, and then taking 2 steps back and allowing a child-centric kind of a perspective when they're making those decisions, I think will be helpful for the child. And it's never about the parents. Yes, the parents come in with this. Of course, I mean, some parents are coming with medical reasons. Some people come through infertility, loss of a child through in the biological space. Those are situations, and we see hybrid families. We also see, families where they want to do something good for the society or good for the, for the children in these homes. While the thought is altruistic and probably very well intentioned, however, coming from that space of you doing something, there is a symbiotic relationship here. I mean, there is a give and take in the relationship itself between the parent and the child. So
Yeah.
acknowledging that, that
Yeah.
both are benefiting, I think
Yeah.
is very, very important.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing is to look at adoption as a way to expand your family, and it's just another way to parent and experience a motherhood or fatherhood, experience that
Absolutely. Gayatri, the reason I'm smiling is because I run a nonprofit myself, and I volunteered, I think, from the age of 15. The first space I volunteered was for children. And I think I told you this, that the reason I was sent to volunteer, my grandmother sent me to volunteer because, I grew up in a violent home which was marked by domestic violence. And when I went and complained to my grandmother saying, everybody else has great parents, everybody's parents gets along, why should it be me? I started going into that why me, oh poor me rut. And my grandmother sent me over to an orphanage down the road where she was a trustee, and I was asked to volunteer. And that was the starting point of my volunteering with children. And for me, that was an eye opener. And the reason it was an eye opener was because until that point, I had heard everything what society had talked about me. I'd heard about, like you said, adoption being spoken of as a noble thing to do, as giving a child a life and things like that. And I never thought about it. I would hear it, but I never thought about it. But when I went to the orphanages and I started volunteering and I had conversations with these children, at 15, you're just a few years older than these children, right? So the dynamics is very different. And I realized these children are not very different from me. They are just like me. They feel the same way. They care the same way. They want to be held like I do. They want to be loved like I do, right? And they're just human beings. And this is all about love. And for me, the turning point came when I was 19 and I was sitting on the, on the steps of an orphanage. And this young boy, who must have been 8 or 9, sat next to me and said, I'm not an orphan. And he said his mother, his family had placed him for adoption because his father was violent and his father was drunk. And he said, if I have been sent to this orphanage because if my father, when my parents fight, I intervene. And if I were to, if I were to be injured in the process, my family would lose a breadwinner. So my mother said, who will feed the family? So therefore, to protect the father, the child was sent into the orphanage. And I remember sitting there and thinking, this child and I aren't very different. We have the same alcoholic father, we have the same violence, we have the same problems, except that the only difference was his family put him in an orphanage and I lived in a home, and there was no difference at all. And for me, ever since then, the thought process has always been this: there is nothing noble about giving a child a life, because that's then about you. It's not about the child. And the only reason, if you give yourself that opportunity, it's really about allowing yourself to love. And we all want love in our lives. So the more honest we get with it, I think it's better for all
Yeah,
of us.
I hear what you're saying, Rekha, and I think it's very, very important. And I think, when I started the space,
Yeah,
and this was one of the things that I was very, very, mindful about. Okay,
yeah, yeah,
uh, because I remember 22, 24 years ago when people would say these things to me, I would actually feel very, very uncomfortable.
yes,
Okay, and I
yes,
didn't have the language, or I didn't know how to
yeah,
assert myself
yes,
because I was far too younger to assert myself
exactly,
at that point in time, right?
yes,
That this is nothing noble. I mean, I've done it
yes,
because this is something that I want to experience, or
yes,
as a couple, my husband and I
yeah,
wanted to experience parenting. So I think
yeah,
that I was very, very mindful, and I would want to thank Dr. Aloma also for it, and the kind of mentoring that actually and
yeah,
Dr. Saris Bhaskar was also it works for Padme Foundation, and she's one of our counselors. She was my first counselor in Chennai when I reached out to her. You
yeah,
know,
Yeah.
about this whole
Yeah.
thing, and
Yeah.
she really kind of gave me those that the tool and the
Yeah.
awareness for me to
Yeah.
prepare myself, but that
Yeah.
was too few and far between,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And that is how Padme came into being, saying that okay, we are going to focus in preparedness, in
Yes.
counseling. Now, if there is a
Yes.
parent coming in through the
Yeah.
infertility or through some
Yeah.
grief,
Yeah.
there is a couple dynamic going on in the
Yes.
relationship, or some
Yeah.
trauma that as an
Yeah.
individual has experienced. I
Yeah.
think you need to unpack all of this, at least bring it to
Absolutely.
your awareness,
Yes.
okay, and realize that this can come in the way of parenting at some point.
Absolutely. And I think I'm so glad we're talking about this because adoption is shrouded in a lot of mystery, and a lot of that mystery is it's actually bias, it's actually prejudices, right? And in India, traditionally, this has almost been a taboo topic. I remember growing up, like I said, for me, on one side, for me, this was the biggest contradiction. My grandmother was a trustee at an orphanage. I was sent out to volunteer, but at the same time, and I told my family that at 19 that I'm never going to be a biological mother. If I ever become a mother, it's always going to be by adoption. The response I got was shocking for me.
Mhm.
And I could hear the bias and the prejudice, which is so deep rooted in them. And I would say it was largely ignorance. It was largely
Yeah, it is
ignorance
a
of
lot.
that.
I think people are
Yes,
intentioned. Okay. I don't think for many of them, at least the people that I've come across in my journey, right? And when I have to explore or talk about my own journey with them, I think it is sometimes, as you said, not having the right information, okay,
yes,
about the process or about
yeah,
the children and
yeah,
about what you've been hearing in the system. Those
yes,
biases which we carry in different systems, in different
yeah,
walks of
yes,
life, and then adoption is one of them, right?
yes,
So it is what you've seen, what you've heard, and you've grown up, and then there is that that bias just unconsciously coming in those conversations. And then
yeah,
I think it's also how you communicate, right? Keeping
yes,
that person with respect, that perhaps it's only that they don't have that information, and then
yes,
sharing that information, I think is a more positive approach towards sensitizing the society and the environment around you,
yeah.
rather than getting defensive and all, kind of,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the biases you have observed in your, in the work you do? And do you see more than the biases, like, because you're in the space now and you've been in this entrenched in the space for a very long time, uh, have you seen shifts? Have you seen changes in the way people are approaching adoption?
Yes, I think I must say that in the last 6, 7 years,
Yeah.
it's evolving. Okay. I
Right.
do, I do see that parents, in fact, I must applaud the parents from this community because they're far more well prepared than parents from
Yeah.
from other spaces. Okay.
Absolutely.
Because they're reading, they want to understand better, all of that. Of course, there
Mm.
are those those apprehensions, right, that we talk about, like behavioral problems. Is
Yes.
it only pertaining to children from in the adoption space, or
Yeah.
is it genetic leanings of
Yeah.
some sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
uh, those conversations come in too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then most often than not, I would have to, or disabilities, learning
Yeah.
disabilities,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, and the learning curve. So while one must acknowledge that it's really subjective, because most often than not, when children come and are nourished in these homes where there is so much of love and care and support and medical support and learning support, you see them blossoming, okay,
Course.
and they are bridging those gaps quite beautifully.
Yeah.
Nutrition plays a part.
Yeah.
Emotionally, there could have been some gaps that makes
Yeah.
a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
So all of that really kind of, you see the children blossoming, right?
Yeah.
And the other aspect, of course, there are in some cases, okay, where you do see there are learning disabilities. Okay, one needs to acknowledge, because we don't know the gestation period, what
Yes.
has the birth mother gone through, what
Yes.
has been the environment for them, and and there is a lot of research and there's a lot of papers out on how the impact is as small as when they're just in the womb, right? And
Yeah.
there is a lot of that muscle memory and a lot of those
Yeah.
uh, research work is going on in all of those. While so especially for something like autism, for
Yeah.
instance, right? Autism is not something that you can see within the first 1 year.
No. No. Yeah.
Okay, you can only see it later. Okay, perhaps 8 months onwards, they could, if there is a pediatrician who is quite tuned into the developmental aspects of the baby, then they would have a cue on that, right? Otherwise, it can get missed. Now, these are things that, and that happens even through the biological route. It's just not
Absolutely.
the adoption
Absolutely.
route. So I think parents need to understand that there is no certainty
Absolutely. Yeah.
in anything, okay, in parenting itself.
Yeah.
And so you got to walk that path with that uncertainty, and how ready are you to do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, but then I think that's more about whether somebody's ready to parent vis-a-vis
Yeah.
whether someone's ready to adopt. Because all of what we're talking about, whether it's disabilities, whether it is learning, whether you're slow to learn or whether you have challenges at any level, even if it is trauma, remembered trauma from the womb, uh, it is as much applicable to biologically birthed children as it is to children by adoption. There is no difference, and as a parent you have to be really willing to look at how ready are you to deal with that uncertainty, right?
Yes.
I mean, for me it's a
Yes.
parenting approach rather than you
Yeah,
know
and it you nailed it, because it's not only a parental approach, but it's a life approach.
yes, yes,
Okay, it's how much of it is in your control and how much of it is not in your control, and how much can you prepare yourself, right? There is only that much of preparation that one can do when it
yes,
comes to life, and it's what it's going to throw at us, right? So I think those are the important aspects that one needs to be mindful.
yeah,
And this is a work that we do with parents. Actually,
yeah,
we go deeper into more therapeutic aspects, and
yeah,
looking more at anxiety, fear, and
yeah,
apprehensions,
yeah,
building those coping mechanisms. I think that's the work we do at
absolutely.
Padme Foundation, because the rest of the information is out there for you. Okay.
Right, right.
But the work that needs to be done by the self is where we hold space for the parent and help them to,
Yeah.
have these,
Yeah, but I think that's a very crucial aspect of parenting, and particularly when it is, when you're going to be a parent by adoption, because we have normalized biological birth and biological families to such a point that, it's almost, at least, although things are changing right now, it still is, people are still coming, still bridging that gap. I would say
yeah.
this gap is, it's a process, it's a work in process, right? So
Yes,
we are
it's
still,
definitely a work in progress.
yeah,
And one thing that I keep reiterating and we keep talking about in all our conversations is that adoption is another way to expand your family. It's just a
yeah,
legal process.
yeah,
And language, how important language is in the whole process.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you were adopted, the child was adopted,
yeah,
the birth parent is as real as the parents by adoption. I
yeah,
never say adoptive parents. I stopped saying adoptive parents. I mean,
yeah,
start the journey with me. I never thought of myself as an adoptive parent
yeah,
right from day one, and nobody
yes,
told me that, right?
yes,
It was very instinctive for me, and I
yeah,
said, okay, I'm a
a
parent.
parent,
I'm
yeah,
going to go with what I know about parenting, and
yeah,
if I'm not sure, I'm going to learn along the way or reach out for
absolutely,
support, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I think that's important. So
yes,
language is very important for the child in
yeah,
the adoption space, right?
yeah,
the birth parent is as real as the parent by adoption, and one
Yes.
needs to acknowledge that triad.
I think you've actually honed in on, I think, a concern that a lot of people have when they think about adoption, which is, because the children, the parents have a sense of mine, and there's a sense of, I think we spoke about it, the lineage, the continuity of the lineage, the continuity of the name, all of that, right? And I think sometimes for some people, I know this was traditionally a bias. I'm not sure how it works this nowadays, but there was a thought process that a child I didn't birth is not entirely mine. I have to share, and I may not want to share, right? So, what you talk about acknowledging the triad is very, very crucial here, because I think there's no running away from it.
There's no running away from it. And the birth parent is an important equation in this, because when you are going to tell your child about the adoption status and you're going to disclose the identity, which is imperative, which is very, very important for their own self-acceptance of who they are and where they are in their journey in life. It is very, very important part of their identity itself. Okay. It's not whole of their identity, but it's a part of their identity. Right. So it's important to acknowledge, accept, and work on your fears and your insecurities, and not really the child's fears and insecurities.
Absolutely. I don't think it is. I think it's one of the most important thing a parent can do for the child is not make them responsible for the parent's well-being at any level. It's not the child's job to take care of you, ensure that you're okay. Yes. You have to do your own work, right?
Yes. So you have to do some work on yourself before you come into the space. Can you acknowledge the birth parents, as real as what you are perhaps to the child? Okay. Are you willing to put aside all your biases? Okay. And look at developmental milestones through a child-centric perspective? Okay. Are you willing to cast aside caste, race, color? Okay. All of this, gender, religion, all of this aside. Okay. Are you willing to accept this child unconditionally?
Yes, absolutely. I think
then perhaps you're on the right path.
Yeah, right. So tell us, what else do people who want to adopt, what else do they have to do to prepare themselves for the process, or even to, even for those who are new parents through adoption, in terms of setting, establishing that child-parent bond, or in developing those child-parent bond? How do people prepare themselves?
Yeah, see, trust and attachment and bonding are important. Okay, a sense of belonging, all of that comes into place. And so here is the work that the parents have to do. The child comes from a home that the child is used to, and that's the only thing that the child is used to at that point in time. There is a caregiver who's been taking care of the child, the baby, and today you don't really get 0 to 1, or you're getting children who are above 1.5, okay, and by the time there is some sense of felt experience by the child, and 2.5, they clearly can recognize their caregiver at that moment in time when they're in the adoption home. So giving space, because that is their home. Okay. That is their home. That's where they've been taken care of, right? For the months that they've been there, or the years that they've been there. So bringing them home is a process where it's going to take, especially for older children, it may take 1 or 2 years for that entire process of attachment and bonding and trust to begin. And you need to take those steps back and be there, however difficult it is for you, and do reach out for counseling and support at that point in time when you don't know how to handle it. Okay. And we are happy to do that for you. But stepping back and giving time for the child to settle in and, start those process of attachment is important. So I'll give you this example of attachment. couples, when they get married, they come from different birth families and birth origins. They come with different styles of attachment and bonding and communication, right? When they come together, so again, they can come from socially different constructs, cultural constructs, because India is so vast and so diverse. Okay. Now, coming back together as a couple, now whether you've decided to fall in love and get married, or have the arranged marriage, whatever it is, it takes time to understand those patterns, and you're working as a couple on that. So likewise, a child joining the family is going to come with their own attachment process that they know best,
Yeah.
and what they've experienced, or the bonding, or
Yeah.
and so you need to allow that space for that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Also to mention that there are a significant number of single parents out there who are also managing. Sometimes people who separate after they become a family. So everything you say is so pertinent to each of us as individuals, no matter what our life situation is or who we are with.
Yes.
We have to create space for attachments of other people.
Yes.
It's not, it's not children are not meant to take care of us. Just as we need the space to wean off or to make those transitions, a child probably needs more or less. It's
Yes. Yes.
right.
It definitely, I mean, and also, while you provided stable, nurturing, um, a space for the child to grow in, of course, you need to have boundaries also. Everything is not okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
finding that, so there is a struggle there as well for some of the parents, because they feel that if there are boundaries, then would they be seen as that they're being less loved?
yeah, yeah,
There are so many different aspects that come in, in the sessions, and and I think it's also to acknowledge that now parents are saying, okay, I don't know this and I want to know more about it. And I think it's a welcome step, because none of us know everything, and we are learning as parents. You're growing along with your children in your parenting journey.
I think you have to be extremely self-aware as a human being to step up and
Yeah.
say, I don't know everything about parenting. And because, this is not again a situation that parents who people who become parents by virtue of adoption face. This is a situation every parent faces. It's a parenting situation.
Yes,
It's
it
not
is.
how your family has formed is
It
not
doesn't matter
helpful.
how your family is formed, as you rightly said, because parenting skills and learning that journey is only when you make your mistakes and grow along as a
Absolutely.
family, right? And but what's
Right.
important is to just provide that safe,
Yeah.
unconditional space for your child to have those open conversations and dialogues.
Right, absolutely. So one last question. How can we as individuals, I mean, clearly it's so obvious that we need more conversations about adoption in the mainstream. We need this to be so much more normal. Becoming a parent is a life choice. How you become a parent should not come under the radar for so much of scanning. It's a
Yes,
personal
yes,
choice and you should do it. But today like we mentioned earlier on in our conversation, we are in a state of transition where
yes.
we are creating space to where adoption is a normal pathway to form families. What can we as individuals who are not adoptive parents or who are not who don't want to be parents, who are just the part of the society, what can we do to break the bias against adoption?
I think one is to, as to be the ally, right? I mean, and, to understand the language. What do you say? How do you say it, right?
Mm.
There are, these really, like one of those questions that was thrown is this your real child?
Okay, it gets my goat. I'm sorry, that really gets my goat.
Okay. It's happened to many
I, I
parents,
know, I
right?
know.
And so sad. Is that the only alternative for you? Okay.
Yeah.
Just being mindful that adoption is only a way of expanding a family. It's not superior or inferior to any other route. It is as normal as, you know, anything, any other route that one opts for, or a choice that one opts for. I would think parenting itself is a choice. You
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was,
okay?
when you were telling me this, all I was thinking of was it's not any of our business as to whether another person chooses to be a parent or not. And we have no business asking people these questions.
Yeah, not asking people the all these questions, and I think the myths and biases, Rekha, I think we need a separate conversation on it, right? Because it's so vast, you
Yeah,
know, it's so
yeah,
vast. The adoption landscape is so vast, and it comes in from all spaces, from school, from the apartment that you're living in, from your extended family, your friends, and from children, from the peer group. So it
yeah,
really, it's another conversation altogether. But uh, as I said, like, adoption is a choice that you make. Parenting is a
yeah,
choice that you make. No
yeah.
one is forcing you to do anything. You have to take the ownership
Mm,
and walk the path
yeah,
courageously,
yeah.
and do whatever you have to do and learn whatever you need to do along the way, and reach out for support as and when you need.
Absolutely. I think, and for me, like also one of the things I believe in as being an ally, and I would like to consider myself an ally for a number of causes, is to also recognize that when you're in the mainstream, you have a lot of privilege. And a part of that privilege is be having the ability to tell somebody who is asking questions they shouldn't be asking, or is insensitive, or is using framing their questions in a way that hurt. It is to speak up and say, that's not okay. I'm not okay with this. And, you know, you have privilege. We all have privilege, and we can use that privilege to make this, to make this more seamless, to make this integration more seamless, so that tomorrow no child who's playing on the playground should ever be have to face any kind of should not be the receiving end of any kind of pain
So, yeah,
because
Rekha, I mean, I hear you, but yet, let me tell you this, that sometimes you can't keep educating the entire world or creating that awareness. I mean, there is, so what you need to do as a parent is to build your skills and build skills for your child to cope with
absolutely,
the environment,
absolutely.
because,
But
yeah,
Gayatri, we're talking about allies here. And what
yeah,
I'm saying is, as an ally, you can intervene. You can
yeah,
use your
you
privilege
can.
to keep quiet,
Yes,
right? It
yes,
shouldn't. It
yes.
shouldn't be the burden of children and parents to have to defend something that's very normal and natural for them. And the
Yeah.
more we speak up, the more we make that the norm. I think the easier it becomes for all of us to, be
Yes,
more
yes, Rekha.
fulfilled people.
I do understand. There's one thing that I wanted to actually say. I mean, it's, see, even within the adoption ecosystem, okay, not like all counselors understand about the adoption
Yeah,
nuances. Let me tell you
yeah,
that. Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we need to have adopt even counselors and therapists and counseling psychologists to understand the space of adoption. Okay, uh, pediatricians, the medical community, the gynecologists, the infertility centers. Okay, all of them, right? I mean, they
Yeah,
make a part. They at some point they're all impacting that ecosystem, by
yeah,
what they're saying and
yeah,
their actions or their behavior, right? It's
absolutely.
impact. Also within the adoption ecosystem, I'm talking about the parents themselves, right, who chose to take on this journey.
Yeah,
How ready are you, and how do you perceive adoption?
yeah,
I sometimes see a lot of shame and fear associated
of
even
course.
with
Of
parents
course.
who have done this, right? The
Absolutely.
adoption process. So I think, I think it's important for everybody to kind
It
of
is.
talk about it, and it's I mean, it's normalize it, right? I mean, I don't even know
Absolutely.
why it is not normal, because having a child is as normal as, I don't know.
No, for children, people who want children, like
For
for
people
me,
who,
yeah, for
no,
me,
I'm not
I've
talking
always
about,
been, yeah, I know. I'm
I'm
just
just
saying,
talking about people who want to expand their families, right?
right, right,
Yeah.
absolutely, right. Anyway, I think we've come to the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. I think we always end up going everywhere, Gayatri, you and I, when we talk. So, and I think
Yes.
this has been a great one because we've really covered a lot of ground. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today and for just laying it out on the ground for all of us to understand. I really hope a lot of people watch this video, understand what who can understand what we're trying to do here by having conversations like this. Gayatri, any last words before we sign off?
Thank you, Rekha, for bringing me into this conversation. As I said, there's whenever I have any of these sessions with you, there are always new perspectives, and it kind of, the energy that you and I share, I think it's quite evident, and,
Absolutely.
and I think we're aligned in many ways.
Yeah,
And thank you for um, doing this. And please drop in a mail, I mean, to all the audience. If you have
yeah,
any questions, do
yeah,
drop in a mail, and then we are here. So it's a one-stop place. So we have pediatricians, we have mentors, we have counselors, we have peer support groups. We have, of course, you can follow us on Facebook,
yeah.
Instagram, and on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So just in case anybody's interested or would like to know more about Padme, would like to support Padme's activities, please do check out their pages, their social handles. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. Gayatri's on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. She's tagged on all the announcement posts that we have put up for this conversation. She's also available. So if you want to drop a comment at the end of on this chat at the end of this live, please do so. Please do reach out. Please let us all do our bit to normalize adoption so that we don't have to have these conversations about it, that everybody knows, and it's just one more choice we all make. Thank you once again, Gayatri. Thank you very much for joining me. I want